Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this Zoom call/training for the NCAI Fund Tribal Victim Services Micro Grant Program. This is Kelly Crow with First Pick. I just realized that my camera's not on, so let me turn myself on. Oh, I know what the problem is. My computer's closed. All kinds of fun issues today. Thank you all for joining us. We're here today with Christine Dennis, who's going to be walking us through some of the things to be thinking about when it comes to doing procurement for contract services. But before we start, I'm going to hand it over to Esther from NCAI, and then I'll come back on and share a little bit about kind of our overall philosophy, and then kick it off with, or kick it over to Christine to get into the meats of the presentation.
Great, thanks, Kelly. And special thank you to First Pick for putting this together. You know, they've been working really hard to get all of these materials ready for all of you.
Turn it down just a little, please.
And I think if we can all make sure you're on mute if you're not talking, it'll help a little bit. But yeah, so thank you so much to First Pick for putting this together. And I'm so glad all of you could join us today. As I mentioned, my name is Esther Labrado. I'm with NCAI. And you know, just one more congratulations to all of you. Thank you for kind of, you know, making sure you're being really responsive and working with both First Pick and TLPI as we get through the budget development process and on to the award itself. And like I said, we've, you know, been working hard to get these materials ready to make this program as successful for all of you as possible. You know, it's NCAI's primary goal is really to get this funding where it needs to go, which is to all of you to help serve victims of crime in your communities. So we wanted to make sure that, you know, especially for something like procurement, it can be really complicated, that we take the time to really give you as many resources as possible. So thank you to all of you for joining, and to First Pick, and I will turn it back to you, Kelly.
Great, thank you. Yeah, to Esther's point, the reason why we've asked everybody to join is because we understand that different grantees are at different places in terms of their tribes or their organizations' procurement policies and processes. And we recognize that part of the intention of these funds are both to get the funding to you all to be able to provide victim services, but it's also to be able to provide training and technical assistance and support so that you are in a position to be able to apply directly to OVC in the future for the larger tribal set-aside funding that's available through that department. And so one of the things that we're going to be talking about today is what is the procurement documentation that you're going to be required to submit when you have contract services that go over your micro purchase threshold, and Christine will walk us through what that all means. But the other part of this is really to help you understand a little bit more if you don't know about the procurement processes that are required for federal funding, and then for you guys to hear that we are here to help you not just around this grant, but to make sure that if you have any need to improve the procurement process, the policies, update anything. Part of our role is to work with you throughout the course of the grant to also prepare you for the larger tribal set-aside funding through OBC. So some of you will already have very established procurement policies and processes in the tribe. We've put together some documentation. We absolutely want you to hear from us that if your internal documentation provides this same information but in a different format, you do not have to copy everything over to our documentation just for the purposes of submitting it with your reimbursement. You can, as long as it has the same information, we can accept the documentation that you are already creating internally or that you're already using internally. If you have any questions about that, you can email it to myself or Christine, and we can look at it ahead of time and let you know. But our entire intention here is to make this process as minimally complicated and as minimally paperwork heavy for you all as possible, because we really want to make sure that that your time and energy goes towards providing services for victims. So with that, I'll hand it over to Christine. And if there's any questions, please go ahead and either you can ask in the chat box or you can unmute yourself and ask. But as Esther said, if you can keep yourself muted when you're not asking a question, we would appreciate that.
Thanks, Kelly. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Christine Dennis, and I am your subject matter expert here on procurement. Basically, what we're going to talk about today is what are you doing, what do you have to do under federal regulation to award a contract that is based on more than just price, okay? So the thing about contract services, do you want the cheapest attorney or do you want the best attorney you can afford? Do you want the guy who's got the big billboard about how he can get everybody out of their drunk driving charges? Or do you want somebody who actually practices in this type of area? So price is a factor. Price is not the only factor, all right? That's how you decide whether you have to go through all of this or not. The federal threshold is if it is between $10,000 and $250,000, then it is considered a small purchase. In theory, the only thing you have to do is get 3 bids, 3 quotes. Is that really the best way to handle it? And the answer is probably not. So we're going to, again, kind of address some of those issues. Does anybody have a micro purchase threshold that is less than $10,000? A lot of people still have $5,000. Just answer in chat or unmute, whatever you're comfortable with.
Mashantucket has a policy of $2,000 or more requires 3 bids.
Okay. And then that's what you're going to have to do. And that it always goes back to, here's what the federal regs are, but you need to go back to what does your policy specifically state. Okay. So because this is a small purchase with with some RFP requests for proposal factors involved, we don't have to do public advertising because it is low, okay? We do have to evaluate our sources. So one of the first things I want to talk about is the documentation. This is a basic cover sheet. And you should be able to use this for whatever kind of paperwork you have as supporting, okay? The reason that we want to clarify we did this as a small purchase. If not, we see the word RFP in here and we're going to be looking for more advanced things, okay? We don't want to make it that complicated if we don't have to. So basically what this is, you know, what method did we use? What were we doing? And for our example today, we're going to go after legal services. You may have all kinds of different contract services. You may have consultant services. You may have, tell me some of the other types of services y'all are looking at. Is anybody looking at anything other than legal? Counseling services, anything like that?
Mashantucket is looking at services that might not necessarily be covered by the tribal health plan.
Okay.
Some of them may refer or prefer to see their own counselor outside of our plan, so things like that.
Okay, so basically you're looking for a way to provide counseling services outside.
Yes.
Yeah, Christine. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just agreeing with Christine. Stuff that, you know, if it's cultural, if they prefer to do a cultural healing type counseling, or if they prefer something that the Tribal Health Services insurance plan does not cover.
Mhm.
Those types of things. We had a discussion with Robin Patterson earlier today on that, and we're going to get some more clarification.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, again, the hardest part is identifying what specifically you're looking for, and then how are you going to evaluate it? How are you going to judge A and B and C? Okay, and that's what we're going to think about as we're going through here. You have to include Indian preference in every contract. Okay, that's a requirement. How do you do it? We'll talk about that. One of the keys is you have to have open competition, okay? Fair and open competition. If you are doing a small purchase, you can't really restrict the bidders. Anybody has the ability to bid, okay? So if you have a group of people in mind, you can certainly contact them and ask them to submit a proposal and let them know this is coming. But you have to have competition. Even if you think you know who you're going to wind up with based on your local options and that type of thing, you still have to go through the process to show we did do this with competition, and here's why we chose this one. Does that make sense? Does anybody have a question on that?
Christine, I have a question while folks are thinking. We have a couple people who are going to be contracting with folks to provide very unique services.
Mm-hmm.
Where there may only be one individual
Mm-hmm.
available, something like equine therapy or
Right.
traditional healing services.
Mm-hmm.
What is your recommendation, or maybe you're already going to get into, if you don't have 2 or 3 people to reach out to, how you go about making sure that you show that you've done open and fair competition?
Okay, and that's a great question, because this happens a lot in Indian country based on location. You know, geography, small towns, just general availability. This is a fairly common situation. Here's what you do. In this case, let's say we are doing equine therapy. I probably didn't say that right, sorry. We're starting out as we're trying to do a small purchase. So we are going to start calling around, and we would document. We called this person, this person, this person. We only have one qualified provider. We're no longer doing a small purchase. We're now doing a sole source, okay? Which is fine, as long as you've got the documentation. The difference is, on a sole source, you have to document there literally is nobody else in the area who can do this. The price is reasonable, and we have grantor approval, okay? Can't do it without those factors. Make sense? You need to look at your own procurement policy and see what it specifically tells you as to how to do a sole source. But if you are doing a sole source, again, you have to prove they were literally the only ones available. Okay? Questions, comments, statements, anything? So what's competition? How do we get competition? How is that defined in the regulations? And it is at least 2 responsive, responsible vendors who are willing and able to compete. What does that mean in English? It means we have at least 2 people who can do what we want in the manner we want it done. Okay? If you don't have at least 2, you don't have competition, and that's when you're going to go to your sole source. So, Any questions yet? How do you know if a vendor is responsible? What's the first thing you do to determine whether they're responsible? Is everybody familiar with sam.gov? Is anybody familiar with sam.gov? Oh, good. I'm seeing some people going, yep. Yeah, you have to check vendors and make sure that they are not suspended or debarred from doing business with grant, basically for getting paid with grant monies. I can tell you right now, you don't get on that for one oops. It's a pattern of behavior. It is so important when you are dealing with services to really check them. Always want to ask for references. Ask around to other tribes in the area. Talk to some of your, anybody really in the area. Maybe do a Better Business Bureau search, all of these things. But you have to prove you have checked sam.gov and that they are not suspended or debarred, okay? Questions yet? I'm going to go, let's start. Trying to decide where do I want to go. Let's start here. So this form is basically our RFP. How did we get it? Anybody know? How did we get an RFP? We made a decision, first off, here's our scope of work. We need legal services to provide legal advice to victim service microgrant. Services expected include providing participant advice, review of contract, other services as needed during the period. Okay, we know we need an attorney. Here are the things we expect to do. Are we going to issue, based on this, looking at that, are we going to have a flat rate contract like we would if we were buying supplies? And the answer is probably not. We're going to most likely have a not to exceed contract. Why is that? Because we don't know going in how often we're going to need an attorney. So what we're looking at in this award is, and probably with counselors, most contract services, you'll be looking at an hourly rate, okay? That's what we're looking at on price. We already said price is not the only factor here. What are the things that we know we want to look at? We want to look at experience, definitely. We're required to do Indian preference. What's the point of having this schedule? You are required to tell all potential vendors, here's how we are going to judge your proposal, okay? Looking at this, I know price and experience are roughly equal in the decision. Does that seem about reasonable? Yeah, does it have to be like this? No, you could put more points on experience or more points on price. It's entirely up to you. You may add other things. I put references in here. Is there anything else you might want to add? Bios, yeah, you can request that they provide their whole resume. I don't see any problem with that. Should be pretty much covered under experience, but maybe not. Do you have any special awards? Here's one thing I want to stress to you, okay? A lot of people are always like, well, we need to put licensing in there as a point factor. No, you do not. think about why not. You have to award to a responsive and responsible vendor, okay? The contractor doesn't have a license. Do they meet that qualification? The answer is nope. So that's part of the requirements. That's not a, we're going to give you points. Does that make sense? How many of y'all do tribal preference? You have to do Indian preference. Tribal preference is optional. If you're going to do it, you have to put it in the RFP. Okay, our RFP, again, request for proposal. We are telling you, lawyers, here's what we want. Here's how we're going to judge you. Okay, here's our due date. Here's who we call. Send your response to it, to Susie here. So here's the big question. How are you going to find people to bid? We said you are not required to do a public notice. You can if you want to. It's entirely up to you. If you're not going to do a public notice, how the heck are you going to find these people? What do you think? Qualified vendor list through the tribe's procurement department. It's like you're reading my mind. That's my first choice. What if you don't have a tribal procurement department that's keeping a qualified vendor list? What do you do? You can always post a notice in the paper. You can always do that. Call around to some other tribes in the area. Hey, who do you use for this kind of work? Ask people in the tribe. Surely you're not the only ones who need an attorney. Who else has been used? How did they find them? Do you have multiple suggestions? Okay, all of these are reasonable ways. You can go to the public licensing with your state local bar and, you know, go through there and see, is there anybody we'd want to talk to? The easiest thing to do if you're going to go to a big pool like your state's bar association, call and ask if they have any interest and then send them the proposal, the RFP, okay? I know I'm throwing a lot of information at you, and there's just a lot of pieces to this particular puzzle, okay? So don't get overwhelmed. Does anybody have any questions yet?
I have a question.
Sure.
I'm wondering, like, what, because I'm thinking about, I just updated my budget with NCAI. So they're asking that all of our, like, our CPA contract, our fax service, our go-to meeting contract, you know, our payroll service all goes under procurement. So are you, I mean, these, and most of these are old, you know, subscriptions that we've had forever. So are you guys going to want, like, all of that documentation from years ago? I mean, how do you, I don't even know if we still have some of the memos and stuff from those original contracts that were established.
Okay, how much are you, if you're spending less than your micro purchase limit, you're probably fine, okay? Mm-hmm. And your micro purchase is at least, is, you know, somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000. So most of your subscription services are not going to fall in this.
Okay, but like our housekeeping, like, subscription is going to fall in that.
Is
Right.
it more than 10,000?
Well, we do, yeah, it's like 24,000 a year.
Yeah, then you probably do need to go out, at least see when the last time you went out for bid on it was. Because I'm assuming it's somebody who is outside of the tribal organization or the government that you're representing, correct?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, you'll have to document why did we choose them. If it's something that if it's a contract you're already locked into, Kelly and Esther, how do you feel about that? Do they just need to justify and show the documentation where this was done, or in the past, or do we need to start with a new one?
Yeah, what we would just, we just need to show that the tribe has followed, procurement for this. So often, like, we're hearing this because you may be purchasing like a portion of the cost, or you may be purchasing, you may be responsible for, like, you may receive an invoice for services at your department for something that's shared across, multiple departments or something like that. In that case, the tribe is responsible for ensuring that they're following proper procurement when they're engaging with those services. But this, for our purposes of this grant, the portion of it that's being ascribed to the grant is not necessarily going to exceed those thresholds. So we're trying to walk a line here between what NCI is required to check on, because as they go to reimburse the cost that you submit, and not crossing, we want to provide assistance to you if you say, well, we're not doing procurement correctly and we'd like help with that, then we want to make sure, but we're not going to come in and police the entire procurement process. Yeah. So in that case, what you're telling me is that there's shared housekeeping services. That is that entire $24,000 going to be spent? Is that entire $24,000 going to be spent on this, or is that shared across multiple services, multiple departments, multiple grants, and you're just going to, cover a portion of that?
Yeah, it's a shared cost, and it's only going to be like a portion is going to be only, like, I think under this grant it's like $2,000 is going to be shared.
Yeah. You're fine.
So in that case, we're not going to ask you to submit anything. Essentially what's going to happen is that if you submit a reimbursement for a cost or a series of reimbursements, say for a procurement contract, and it exceeds what you've told us is your micro purchase threshold, then we're going to ask for procurement documentation. Okay. Everything that Christine's telling you is relevant for the tribe across all departments and all grants.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Provide support for people if they'd like to update some of those things, but we're not going to go in and police those things unless your particular cost on the grant exceeds your procurement threshold or your micro purchase threshold.
Okay, that helps. I just didn't know if I had to prepare all the, because it's not just, those are just a couple examples, but we have other larger contracts like with our CPA and different services. I just didn't know if we had to prepare all that to get submitted to all of you.
I can't imagine for anything like that. And then the other things that you were talking about in terms of like if there's online subscriptions and those kinds of things, those would potentially meet the criteria of being a small purchase acquisition if they're over $10,000, but they may not have quality of service as a requirement for it. And in that case, we can share with you the documentation for the straight purchase when cost is the only factor, and that's a much simpler process for procurement. So I really don't see anybody charging more than $10,000 for like cell phone contracts and these things that OVC has said need to go into procurement contracts. But if that was the case, we would have you consider whether or not cost is the only factor, or if there is another factor indicated for some of those things, which likely there would not be.
Thank you. That helps clarify it.
Good. And I just threw my email into the chat. I'll do it again as we end. If you've got questions, if you're just not sure, if you want us to take a look, shoot me an email. Be more than happy to kind of help you walk through all of this. Again, the goal here is not to give you a whole bunch of more paperwork than you've already got. The goal is to help you clarify what you have to support your decision so we can get you reimbursed, okay? So there are multiple ways to meet that requirement. This is more for if you're just not sure where to start, here's where we're going to start. And again, Kelly made a great point. If cost is your only factor, this is not what you're doing, okay? You're doing a completely different process that's way simpler. Does that help? Does that confuse everybody further? Hopefully it helped. Any questions yet? That was a great question, Keely. Thank you. Okay, so we've kind of identified, here's how we are going to put together our RFP so that anybody who wants to send in a proposal knows this is how you need to structure it. And honestly, I respond to these all the time. And when I look at the RFP, I know, okay, I'm going to, as a proposer, I probably want to do a paragraph with experience, paragraph with pricing, paragraph on Indian preference, listing of references. Okay, so this is designed to help your proposer provide the information you need to make the decision. Does that help? Okay, you've got to include when is it due. This is not like construction where we have a big bid opening and all of that. You don't have to do that here. We just say, have your everything in by the 15th. We'll get back to you, okay? So let's talk about some of the information we're going to look at, and that's at the end. Don't look, it'll make you dizzy. So we have gone out for proposals, okay? Is this bid for goods or services? Services. Will it be made primarily on price and other factors? Yes. What are we trying to do? Legal. Scope is attached. The scope that's attached should be the RFP form that we had earlier, okay? That one that we just looked at. We're going to do one of these evaluation sheets basically for every proposal we receive. What are the factors that we're using to make the award? We've decided price, experience, Indian preference as a has to, and references. Why do we want references? I want to see that you really can do what you say you're doing. I want somebody to call and say, okay, Susie says that she can provide these services. Has she done that for you? Was it done timely? Did you have issues with delivery, with changing scopes? Did anything change after the contract was awarded? Why do you want to know that? This is supposed to be their best offer, okay? Best and final. Period. Best and final. If it is not their best and final, then I don't really want to do business with them, because now we're negotiating, and we can't do negotiation in process. Does that make sense to everybody? David's got it. Anybody else? Okay, this RFP is not going to be advertised. Again, it's not required to be, but we don't expect our service contract to exceed $25,000. Okay, this is our rationale. Is everybody good so far? So here's who we talk to. Do they receive Indian preference? We always have to look at that, okay? They don't receive Indian preference, I can guarantee they're not getting tribal preference. Do they receive other types of preference? No, not in this case. Their proposal score is 70. How did we get to that? Here's our scoring sheet. Here is one of the key things that you all need to keep in mind with this funding, okay? If the proposed rates exceed the threshold of $81.25 an hour or $650 daily, you have to have justification and approval before you contract, okay?
And Christine, I just sent you an updated version of this
Yes.
in your email. Maybe we can pull it up. While she's doing that, I'll just explain in order to prevent.
Oh, we can't do it. I can't pull it from
You can't
my
pull it up
email right now. Sorry.
I'm going to send this out to everybody, but in order to prevent you all from having to do a second set of paperwork, this question is being changed. So it's going to ask you to include what the proposed rate is. And if the rate exceeds the OJP threshold, it's going to ask for a very brief description of your justification for why. That might be, legal services aren't available under 8125, or these are the only services, this is unique, this has, whatever it might be that we use. What we'll do then is when you submit this documentation, we'll use this as the documentation to submit to NCAI for them to be able to sign off and approve the rate, so that you are not having to do a second set of paperwork in order to get approval on this.
Is everyone clear on that? Because this is important. Are you going to be doing this for everything? If it's a contract, yeah, you are. You have to at least verify these amounts. These are regulatory set. Okay, is what it is. How do you justify it? Kelly just went through exactly how you would justify it, okay? So as part of using an RFP, you have to score each proposal. And you have to score it exactly how you said you were going to when you put out that proposal, okay? So what do I know for this one? Looking at their score sheet, what do I know? Not native. They're not the cheapest. How do I know they're not the cheapest? Anybody want to take a shot at that one? Look at the price point. They got 20 on a 30-point scale. Honestly, looking at that, my first thought is they're probably one of the more expensive ones we got. But their experience and their references are excellent. Okay? Is it going to be enough to make us want to award the contract? We don't know yet until we look at the rest of them. But their total points right now are 70 points. Is that enough? Don't know yet. Okay. Does anybody have any questions on this particular one? Okay, let's look at the next one. Again, this first page should be pretty much, the top part should be the same, right until we get to service provider contacted. What we call Bubba's Law. Does not receive Indian preference. Total proposal score is 60, but how did he get to that? Well, let's look. Experience was 20 on a 30-point scale. Meh. I mean, it may not be bad. We don't know. Price, 20 on a 30-point scale. References provided. All of his references checked because we gave him a 20. So his total score is 60. Is he going to get the contract? No. Why not? Because we already have a contract proposal that's outscored him. Okay? Are you with me? How many of you have been through this process? How many of you have been the ones who had to do the scoring? Because that's always fun. Yeah, and what makes it interesting? You've got to figure out, as a group, how are we going to score it? Because there's a lot of ways you can do it. Some tribes I've seen will have, maybe a 3-person committee. Each one will score it, and then they take the average of those 3. Sometimes they score one score sheet as a group, and they establish up front, okay, our best experience will get 30 points, the next one will get 25, the next one will get 20. And then they do that like with price also. Can you do that? Sure, absolutely. As long as you're consistent and as long as you meet what you said you would do, you're totally fine with that. Okay? You have to have Indian preference as a factor. Have to. Price has to be a factor. Everything else is up to you. Okay, so we've got Bubba's Law sitting at 60. As we said right here on our summary. We had Random Legals at 70. We've got one more here. Let's look at this one. Again, same information up at the front. Services, price is not the only factor. Susie's lawyers. Susie's got Indian preference. Okay, she does not have tribal preference. So how are we going to score her? Her proposed rate, from looking at this, does not exceed the threshold because it says it's NA. Okay? Experience. Well, she's got the lowest experience, but she's got really good points for price. And she has Indian preference. If she had just responded with references, we could have probably given her the contract, but she didn't. So she's not getting any points for that. Okay? Once again, you have to offer Indian preference, but just because you have Indian preference does not mean you will get the contract. Susie also had the best price. Great. That's not enough to get her the contract because we've got issues with experience, and that really hits home looking at references. If she had references, she would have provided them. Do you want an attorney who either doesn't have references or didn't read the proposal well enough to know they needed to provide them? I like my attorneys to be pretty detail oriented. Because I gotta tell you, I don't look good in orange and I don't want to go to jail. So I want my attorney to definitely have that detail orientation. All right. Do we have 3 responsible bidders? I would say we do. None of them are on the debarred list. I'm going to say, yeah, we do have three responsible bidders. So now what do we have to do? Now we're going to make a decision. Contract services quote acceptance form. Okay. What are we doing? Literally, we're going to list this firm with this number of points. And at the bottom, we're going to award it to the highest scoring proposal. Okay. And we're going to put their pricing in there. In this case, it was $650 a day. Do we need approval because this is over the threshold? And the answer is no. What if if their price came back at $125 an hour? Would we need approval? What's the threshold? $81.25 is the threshold. Okay, what do we do then? How are you going to justify it? Yeah, you've got to get approval. Yep, you have to show this is why we would like your permission to go over the threshold. We went out for bid and we, after going through the process, want to award to this bidder because of these factors, and we need your blessing. Can be as simple as a memo to file. You know, there's a lot of ways you can do it. Honestly, I'm probably going to do a memo to file that says exactly why we need this. And then you have to keep that approval with all of this, okay? Are we finished? I think we are. Let's look and see, shall we? Have we identified our procurement method? Yep, small purchase with RFP, which means there was no advertising required. Do we have a description of services? Yeah, we identified what specifically we were looking for with the legal. We have 3 quotes. We documented who was selected. Why did we reject the other bidders? Because they didn't score as high. Cost price reasonable? Yes. We'll assume that we have a document in there. Did we issue a purchase order or a contract here? We're going to issue a contract because it's capped at, in this case, let's say $25,000. So we are going to pay a daily rate again, based on what we did for the award. So right here, that's how they bid it. So we're going to have a contract that outlines do not exceed, okay? Indian preference is checked, but we didn't award the contract to the bidder with Indian preference. Can we do that? What's the key here? The key is you have to notify all bidders that Indian preference applies. It's not a rule that you award it to someone who has Indian preference, but you do have to notify everyone that that is a factor. Okay, and then we did the debarred list and they weren't on it. Are we good to go? We are. Okay, questions? How do you determine whether the cost or price is reasonable? In this kind of situation, probably the easiest way to do it would be to Google legal services or look at other departments within the tribe. See what they're paying. Market rate comparison. Yeah, that works too. How much do we expect to pay? Can we afford it? Why do you need to know that? This is a lot of paper here. If we can't afford to pay the market rate or what we expect to be the going rate, then we need to find another way to do this entirely. Does that make sense? Or we might know, hey, based on our budget and what the expected rates are for legal services here, is there any of this we can do ourselves? Or do we need to take out an activity in the budget? Okay, does that make sense? I know I keep asking that, but again, the key is you are going to have to document this. And you need to understand what it is you're asking the vendors to provide and what you need to include in your file and why. So this is a reference, but the first thing you really need to do is look at your own procurement policy and see what does it say we have to do. Okay? What kind of questions do you all have?
I can add one thing for everyone. So the requirement is going to be that when you submit your reimbursement request, that you are submitting this documentation, this procurement packet, along with the contract that you have with the contract specialist that you've procured at the point that you submit for reimbursement. It's going to be in your best interest that if you have a contract, if you go through all of this and the person that you're choosing is over those thresholds of 8125 or 650 a day, that you submit this documentation prior to making any payment to your contract specialist. Because if you go ahead and pay the contract specialist before you've received approval and NCAI is not able to approve that, they're not going to be able to reimburse you that money. So I just want to make sure that everybody understands that even though this documentation is only going to be asked of you at the point that you are submitting a reimbursement, we strongly, strongly, strongly recommend that if it requires approval, that you submit it to us prior to making any payment, so that you don't get yourselves out ahead of something that you can't get reimbursed for.
Yeah, because again, then it's a disallowed cost. Nobody likes a disallowed cost. Does anybody have different forms they use? Do you have your own procurement system and you have different forms set up, or will you actually be using these, or what do you think is going to happen as the process gets going?
Hey, Christine, it's David from Ashantucket. I have a question kind of along those same lines.
Sure.
I'm the grants administrator for the tribe. I don't do the procurement side, the back end of things, but as I mentioned earlier, our threshold according to our policy is that anything above $2,001 requires 3 bids. So my question is that if our threshold is $2,000, at what point, after selection of, getting 3 bids and the selection, does it make sense to do a contractual or a consultant agreement versus, say, just a requisition and purchase order for fee for service, given the extra administrative effort that the tribe would have to do a formal contractual or consultant agreement?
Okay, if you expect it to go more than 2,000, I would just do it up front. Well, let me back up. The first thing I would want to do is see if your council's willing to go a little higher on that. But again, that's their decision, not mine. If you have reason to believe that it's going to be more than $2,000, I would just do this all up front, get the bids, and just be done with it instead of kind of inching your way along. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah, it's definitely something I'm going to want to talk to the procurement department about, especially if we're required to be submitting this form or procurement's own form to make sure that they did score contracts, contractual proposals.
Yeah, and that's the big deal with the RFP is you have to tell them, here's what we're scoring you on, here's how we're going to score it, and then show in the paperwork that you keep that you did exactly what you said you would, okay? So it's critical that everybody works off of that same information.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Good question. Anybody else have anything? Okay, I've never had a group this quiet. What's the story here? Y'all already doing it right, or do you just, are you not sure where to start with it? Okay, if the answer is you're not sure where to start with it, that's why we're here. So if you don't want to kind of go into it in a group situation, it's totally fine. Feel free to reach out to me or to Kelly, and we'll help you get through the process. Kelly, have you got anything else to add here?
No, except just that you kind of touched on it, but just to reiterate to everybody, if what you're hearing from us is making you nervous because you don't feel like we keep referencing that you have to follow what's in your policy, and if you are not sure what's in your policy, or if you've seen the policy and you don't feel like some of this stuff is in the policy, we are also making ourselves available to work with you in the tribe to update your current policy or even create a policy if there is not one. Christine's put together a template policy. These procurement policies can be used across all federal funding, so they are not written specifically for this opportunity. But again, from the standpoint of wanting to be able to provide support for the tribe, not just for this particular project, but for all of the, the ability to engage with federal government at large in a way that you feel confident. We want to make sure that you know that your outreach does not have to be specifically about this cost or that cost. If you say, we think we're okay, we're not sure, would you look over our policy and let us know if you think there's anything we can improve? We'd love to be able to do that for you. We are definitely not here, like I said, from the standpoint of trying to police anybody. We're not going to be reporting anybody to anybody. We find our entire intention by any information that we ask for or that we gather for you is to identify how we can continue to support you guys in the future. So please definitely take advantage of it, because I know based on experience with some of these federal grants that the feds don't always make these kinds of resources available to tribes, and we really, really would like to make sure that you guys get the most out of the services that we're able to offer.
Yeah, and everything that's on this list is a requirement for any grant fund. This is not specific to any particular funding agency. This is straight out of 2 CFR 200. So if you don't have something like this, talk to us and we'll help you develop a plan for not just this grant, but for everything in the tribe. And I'm weird. I love writing a policy. So, I will be more than happy to do that. Okay, does anybody have any other questions? Yes. David, do you have another question?
Sorry, I was looking for the unmute. Yeah, the checklist, I meant to bring this up on the call yesterday that we had with the vehicle procurement. Is the checklist going to be sent out with the grant award terms and conditions, or is it going to be a separate document we can download somewhere?
It's a separate document that Kelly will be sending you.
And you should have received it as part of the materials that I sent out prior to each call. But I also have apparently been scheduling Zoom calls for 3 in the morning instead of 3 in the afternoon.
I was ready. I mean, I don't know what to say.
Kelly, I'll definitely go back and look.
Okay, and just as a heads up to everybody, we are recording all of these Zoom calls and we will be making them available. We're just trying to find a convenient place to post them since they are too big to travel through most people's email. And once we do that, we will also make sure to get you guys the documentation. There will be a resources or help tab on the online reporting system that all of these resources will live on as well. We're just transitioning from the external website to the internal reporting system where you're doing your budgets. And so we just want to get everything migrated over. So it's just going to take a little bit. But for the meantime, if you don't have it in your email, let me know. I'll resend it and look for the recording. It should be coming to you within the next week in case you need to show this to anybody else, or if you forgot something that we were talking about and wanted to go back and rewatch it.
You are very welcome. Yeah, and again, I encourage you to look at your own policy, look at the checklist and see, how do I want to modify this to fit what we do better? This is just the information. You can determine how best to present it based on what you all do. Please don't just reinvent everything if you're already doing it. That's the last thing we want you to do. Okay, any more questions? Any comments? Any statements? Kelly, you want to end us? You want me to? What do we want to do here?
Good. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Yeah, go ahead, Christine. You can end it.
Thank you. And I hope it has been helpful. And again, if not, shoot me an email or shoot Kelly an email and we'll be glad to help out. Okay. Do I need to put my email in again or do you have it?